It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. If Charles Dickens were writing a book about campaign finances, it would be clear who is on what side. The Democrats had a record night last night, bringing in $26 million on the strength of the party's star power. Three presidents, Obama, Clinton, and Biden, telling Radio City Music Hall that November isn't about not voting for Trump. It's about building on the success of Joe Biden's first term. Quote, "It's the positive case for somebody who's done an outstanding job," said Obama. On the other side is Donald Trump, whose campaign coffers are being drained by legal fees. Over $5 million last month alone, more than $60 million since the start of last year. Joining us now is NBC's Vaughn Hilliard in California for us. White House correspondent Mike Memoli. Also with us is Amy Parnes, senior political correspondent at The Hill. All right, let's start with the Democrats, the best of times, if you will.
That's right.
That's quite a bit of money.
It's quite a bit of money. The First Lady, Jill Biden, kicked off the night last night by calling this the fundraiser to end all fundraisers. And the people who paid a lot of money to get in that room, they got their money's worth. I mean, Lizzo was great. Mindy Kaling was funny. Stephen Colbert kicked things off with a joke. He said, you don't have three presidents in town for, this is a historic moment. And none of them are going to a court appearance. Obviously, Donald Trump was the punchline often last night. I thought what was so fascinating, though, Katie, is, you have surrogates in a campaign for a reason. They can say things you can't. They can praise you in a way that you won't praise yourself. And that's really the role Barack Obama especially played last night.
I think it's so interesting, and not to cut you off there, but that what Biden's been knocked for is not bringing himself up, not talking positively about the success of his first term in office. And we heard that from as Mike said, from the surrogate in question, President Obama.
Yeah, and there is no one better to do that than President Obama. I talked to people in the room last night, a few donors who said the vibe was electric. These were people who were feeling a little down recently.
Yeah.
They're looking at the economy. They think that people are still down on inflation numbers. They're looking at immigration. They think that the president has bungled that issue a little bit. And so they kind of needed that rush, and they got that last night.
Let's play a little bit of what happened last night.
This guy denies there's a global warming. This guy wants to get rid of not only Roe v. Wade, but which he brags about having done. He wants to get rid of the ability of anyone anywhere in America to ever choose. I mean, all the things he's doing are so old. Speaking of old. And, a little old and out of shape. But anyway.
Ma'am, they're singing to the choir here. Do they expect that this message is going to translate to people outside of Radio City Music Hall?
Well, people outside of Radio City Music Hall really couldn't see it other than these selective clips. I'm a member of the WHCA. I have to say it. We didn't have our cameras in the room. We couldn't really show what happened last night. But as you see there, they're in this sort of like, let's get under Donald Trump's skin phase of the campaign. I think they know that they can provoke him, get him to make mistakes, which is really useful for them right now. I thought what was so interesting, though, really last night, the role Obama played, there were hecklers, there were interruptions. We knew we've seen this at events all across the country. And Obama was the one to scold the protesters, to say, listen, presidency is a lonely seat. These are not easy decisions. You can be morally pure, but you also have to then work with people you disagree with to get things done. And the crowd really erupted. It was like a cathartic moment for them in the room.
Again, $26 million, quite a lot of money. Hillary Clinton, though, infamously outraised Donald Trump in 2016. It didn't mean that she was going to win, so money isn't always the answer here. There was interesting reporting in Politico about how President Biden hasn't reached out to Republicans who have not endorsed Donald Trump, Republicans that maybe could help the Democrats, people like the governor of Maryland, or the former governor of Maryland, and Chris Christie, who was flirting with a third-party ticket. Why is that?
Well, I think you're starting to see them do more of that. I think you saw President Biden say, to Nikki Haley supporters, for instance, if you want to support me, come over. Yeah. And they're kind of opening that door to people. And they're trying to do that a little bit more. If you're reading between the lines, they're making that case to them, like, we are here for you. Don't feel obligated to support the former president. So you'll see more of that, I think, coming up.
But it sounds like it's more to voters and less to the individuals.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right, Vaughn, let's bring you in and talk about Donald Trump. So finances are not as good of a story on his side of things. Talk to me about the sheer amount of money that he's spending, not on campaign events or ads, but legal fees.
Right. More than $80 million at this point have been diverted from political causes for his legal bills at this point in time. And that is where yesterday a senior official for the campaign conceded that over the next 7 months, the Trump campaign is not going to be able to match the Biden campaign dollar for dollar, acknowledging that they will, in fact, be out fundraised by the Biden campaign. But that same campaign official insisted that they will have enough money to win. Of course, for Donald Trump, that is part of this joint fundraising committee that has been set up, in which a part of the any donor's donation will, in fact, go to the Save America PAC, which is the organization that has been going to his legal bills, acknowledging that they are continuing to mount. But next week, there is another major fundraiser that is going to be at Mar-a-Lago, and the Trump campaign is contending that they are going to do better than the Biden campaign last night. Their goal is $33 million. Some key longtime donors to Donald Trump, from Steve Wynn, Kelly Loeffler, Todd Ricketts, the Mercers, Linda McMahon, Woody Johnson, Harold Hamm, folks that are coming down there paying a price of over $800,000 to try to fill Donald Trump's campaign coffers. Because right now, from the last FEC filing report, the Biden campaign has more than double what the Trump campaign has on cash on hand. I want to let you, though, you're looking at an image of Donald Trump there yesterday, just hours before that fundraiser in New York City. Donald Trump was in Long Island and attended the wake of an officer who was killed while on duty. I want to let you listen to part of what Donald Trump said on Fox earlier this morning about that.
I think that politically he can't support the police. I think he's also making a mistake. But I think politically his base won't let him support the police. And I support the police, I would say, at the highest level of any president by far, maybe double or triple.
Of course, more than 100 officers on January 6th were injured when individuals under Donald Trump's name attacked the U.S. Capitol. And of course, Donald Trump, on the very same day you just heard those remarks, he was attacking the daughter of the judge in New York City who is going to be overseeing his case. So there's oftentimes a double standard from the former president when it comes to the justice system and who he attacks versus who he praises. Of course, he has all but ignored the death of Brian Sicknick and the 4 other officers who died by suicide in the months after the January 6th attack. And of course, violent crime around the United States has gone down over the course of the last year. But for Donald Trump, he has been keen to use crime across the country as his own bludgeon to take on Joe Biden and the Democrats with just 7 months until the general election. Katie?
I wonder how the fundraisers or the donors feel about spending money on Donald Trump, from the small to the very big donors, when a lot of that money is just being diverted directly to lawyers' fees.
It's a good question, you know, and I think to a great extent it is a part of the cost that comes with supporting Donald Trump, understanding that his fate on trial is going to be intrinsically tied to his own political future. And by consequence, whether a Republican is in the White House next year and able to advance the policies of what these major donors, individuals who are willing to front more than $800,000 to support a political figure, are looking to advance for their own causes. And so for them, you know, this is a part of what comes with this. We should note that as part of those contributions, only a few $1,000s are able to actually go toward the PAC itself. So this is more of an implication for the small dollar donors who are giving. And the question around the extent to which the RNC, which insisted just yesterday they are going to ramp up and begin hiring hundreds of staffers to place around the country. But right now, the Trump campaign and the RNC are well behind what the Democrats have been able to effectually operationalize over the course of the last year. Well, Donald Trump and his team were just trying to make it through this primary and wade through what is half politics and half legal at this point.
Vaughn, do we know if Donald Trump himself has spent any of his own money on his legal fees so far?
That is a good question. Not at this point in time. We don't have that sort of insight into the actual legal bills. But what we are able to do is look at FEC. These are the federal election campaign finance reports. And that's where you're able to see where the dollars in those reports every month go to law firms. And there's an extensive list of law firms that have been the beneficiaries of Donald Trump's political funds that have been allowed through that Save America PAC to go to them.
Amy talked about this a little bit, and you did as well, the feeling of this campaign, the Biden campaign, and how they feel their voters are feeling about them right now. What is their sense of the next few months? What is their focus going to be on? Do they feel good about President Biden going up against Donald Trump in November?
Well, the Biden team really does see the campaign playing out in phases, and the voters that really will decide the election, the swing voters, the voters who might stay home, they are waiting to sort of engage with them at a later stage of the campaign, because let's face it, neither candidate is popular. People don't like politics right now, and those are the people that are going to wait this out a little bit. And so they're trying, and you see this last night, get Democrats to come home, get them to feel enthusiastic. One of the things I was told President Biden has said, former President Obama has said privately to President Biden is, the State of the Union was great. It electrified the party. Seeing you out on the road a lot, it's good. Keep it up. Keep it up. And I saw Julie Chavez Rodriguez, the campaign manager, last night. She said, we got to just keep this momentum going.
Mike Memoli, Amy Parnes, thank you so much. Von Hilliard, thank you as well.
Hey, everyone. MSNBC has a new and improved app. You'll get real-time alerts and analysis, live blogs, in-depth essays, video highlights, and the best 2024 election coverage. Download the new MSNBC app. Here's how to do it. You tap on the App Store on your phone. You hit search on the bottom right corner. You type in MSNBC. You click on the MSNBC app. You click on Get or the cloud icon and enjoy it.